Communication is an important part of medicine, and I've gathered 4 experts to help give perspective on what it takes to communicate effectively in medicine. In the first part of the video, these medical professionals will share stories of communication they've gone through, and the second part is about advice they'd like to share. Let's get to the introductions. Dr. Rivara is a general pediatric doctor with experience in injury prevention and is credited with the campaign for bicycle helmets.
So I'm Mike Guerin. I am currently the chaplaincy services manager. That means that I oversee all the chaplain functions within the hospital. I've been working as a chaplain probably close to 18 years.
My name is Raja Bakshi. I'm a family physician. I take care of all ages of patients from birth to death. So I've been working as a doctor almost for close to 20 years now.
My name is Diana Pang. I'm a pediatric critical care physician or a pediatric intensivist, and I work in the pediatric intensive care unit, or the PICU for short.
Dr. Rivara goes through a common job of a doctor, delivering bad news.
I'll tell you, a patient I saw on Monday, it was a 3-month-old baby, and the mother brought him in and was concerned about movement of his eyes, and it turns out the child is probably blind. So, it's talking to the mother about, I'm going to send you to a specialist, but I am concerned your child doesn't see as a 3-month-old patient. Those are the kinds of things that happen, fairly all the time.
As a doctor, these experiences are common, and how they're dealt with is important to the patient's healthcare experience. Chaplain Mike provides an example of how not to act as a doctor in these situations. This next story illustrates the importance of respecting patients' wishes.
I once had to tell a doctor to stop CPR. I actually almost had to stand in front of him because he was trying to save this person. And the parents, this was not at this hospital either, and the parents had asked me to please stop him. They'd asked him to please stop, that it was enough, that they understood their child was gone, and the doctor wouldn't stop. I mean, literally would not stop, to the point where I had to almost stand in front of him and tell him to stop. The parents don't want you to do this anymore.
That doctor didn't know when to stop and didn't respect what the parents wanted. It is important to realize that the healthcare provider serves the patient and is not the one calling the shots. In this next story, Dr. Bakshi shows that communication with staff is just as important as communication with the patient.
A nurse that, told me that when they were finished rooming the patient, this baby is not breathing right, right off the bat. And she was absolutely right. And then we were able to quickly escalate the patient to the hospital, the kid to the hospital. So they got the care that they needed. But, if I had blown the nurse off or didn't take the time that I needed to, I missed something. So we're a team.
Dr. Bakshi makes a great point that it's not just one person or doctor who helps create the medical outcome for the patient. It's the whole team. When that team works together and communicates well, patients get better outcomes. However, even when the healthcare team works together and communicates well, it can be difficult to serve a patient. In the next story, Dr. Pang shares one of the toughest patient experiences she's gone through.
We had a patient who was brain dead, and she was very injured. And in medicine, when somebody is brain dead, it means that they're actually dead. But what's confusing is that you can be brain dead, but your heart is still pumping. And anybody who's not in medicine, which is most people, will say, how can you tell me that my baby is dead? You say, how can you say that she's brain dead and that's it? But there's a heartbeat on the monitor. And we had a family who didn't believe us when we said that that their daughter was brain dead, and that meant that she was dead. And the initial communication was, I think, very much talking to the family, like telling the family, your daughter's brain dead, so she's dead. We're going to remove support tomorrow. That was it. I'm sure there was more communication that happened with the family to teach them what that actually meant, and that we were not withdrawing care and letting their daughter die. But they felt that we were killing the daughter. And this was a family who felt like if they didn't voice or act out their anger, they were not fighting for their daughter. And it had nothing to do with their anger at me or anybody else, but that's how they showed their grief and support for their daughter, and how they felt that they were taking care of her and doing everything they could for her. So in their minds, it was them against not what caused her to die in the first place, but it was them against the doctors who were trying to kill her. But it was a very stressful time for the ICU and the nurses, and for me too. We had a lot of extra people involved, with law enforcement and the judge and things like that. And we actually had our own PICU debriefing with a lot of the nurses, because it scared a lot of people, how the family was behaving. And from the PICU side, and as one of her doctors at the point, I had to try to tell them, it's not against you. You can't retaliate against this family again. And it's really hard to tell someone to just roll over and take it, because healthcare providers also need to stand up. We have to stand up for ourselves too, and not be in danger. But ultimately, I think they did withdraw support on this patient, and the family, I think, kind of basically came to terms with it.
That's a tough place to be in, when you feel threatened, but still have to help someone. In the next section, these medical professionals share what they feel is the most important advice for medical communication.
Knowledge, are you knowledgeable in a particular area? But then it's also, how do you communicate that? And people look at, for example, even how people are dressed. So if your physician is dressed in a white coat, wearing a white coat, they tend to be viewed as having more authority.
Absolute must is good listening. You have to be okay to be quiet. And communication doesn't mean talking. It really means listening and understanding.
Just to be encouraging and loving, and let them know that we're a team going through this together.
But I think that issue of how do you communicate with patients, showing empathy with patients, how do you explain information in a way that patients can understand and relate to, but showing empathy, and particularly when you're talking about hard topics, it's showing that, this is hard. I understand that you're upset about it, and I support you in that. Part of it is, do they have accurate knowledge? Part of it is, what are they doing with that knowledge, and what's shaping their interpretation of that information? And you as a doctor have to be respectful of them, realizing that ultimately it's their decision, what they end up doing, and for themselves or their kids. You may disagree with what they do, and you can sort of say that, but you still have to end up respecting it and treat people with respect and say, right, it's ultimately your decision of what you want to do.
Don't promise something that you can't give. The reality of it is that, again, we tend to want to make people feel better. So we'll say things that may not necessarily be deliverable.
You have to respect the people you're talking to. I think that's the most important thing. If they don't understand your medical terms, that does not mean that they're not smart, or they're not somebody who should be respected as a fellow human being.
Number one, to be honest, and to really practice honesty in your communications. And it's something that, goes back to how you're raised to a big degree. And so, having people be honest is really important as a physician. And I think it goes back to values that you get instilled in you when you're young.
So my advice really is just to be open and honest, and don't try to hide a lot of things. Don't try to hide anything with the patient. Just be honest with them about what's going on with them.
The second, probably most common thing that we talk about is being truthful. Be truthful with yourself, be truthful with others, but communicating the truth and the whole story, making sure they understand what it is that they're facing and what the likely outcomes are. That is probably the harder parts of this job. The other thing is, in verbal communication, is learn how to speak. Learn how to speak simply, but learn how to speak precisely. Being able to say exactly what you need to say as succinctly as you can is probably one of the best things you can do. When it comes to writing, and I'll be brutally honest with this, is when you're writing, make sure you read what you wrote. Read it out loud to yourself. Because if you're reading it out loud and it all of a sudden doesn't make sense to you, guess what's going to happen to somebody else? It's not going to make sense to them either. It's always better, and people are much more accepting of you saying, I'm sorry I was wrong, than hearing that you were wrong from somebody else.
Always want to make sure that you have a plan in place, so you're giving them hope for the next steps.
Speak at the level that the patient and family can understand. You know, it's really easy in the medical world to become jargon specific.
What I'd say, for people that are going to go into health sciences, that, your grades do matter. And that you want to try to go to a good college, and then in college be successful and have good grades. Because if you really don't do well in the sciences, then for you to get into a good medical school is going to be difficult, because it is competitive. And so, I think that there's a lot of work, but at the end of the day, there's ultimately a lot of rewards with it as well.
There's no place in life, I don't care where it is, medicine, church, wherever you're going to live, school, whatever. Communication is the key piece to making sure that you have all the information you need, and that the other people that are around you have the information they need.
Two is that I think skill in communication is something that we all need to have. I mean, most people end up being a marriage or some kind of long-term relationship, and communication is clearly the key to that kind of long-term relationship. So I think that the skills you're developing to be a physician are really skills that you're going to need to be successful in life.
I hope this video will help you reflect on the importance of communication in medicine and in life. I hope you take this information with you, and thank you for watching.